The air over Savannah clung to the skin like a warm, oppressive shroud, thick with the scent of marsh water and blooming jasmine, left too long in the heat. It was the summer of 1853, a season that pressed down upon the living like an invisible hand, one that stifled breath, thought, and even rebellion. Cicadas screamed from the trees until their cries blended with the heat, and the sky hung low and trembling, as though unsure whether to collapse into rain or simply smother the land. Beneath it, beyond the marshes and the wavering silver light on the river, the hawthorn plantation rose in its usual spectacle of deceptive charm. The grand white columns of the manor stood like pillars of marble pride, their shine as hollow as the family that lived within. Behind those columns was a silence so strict and so carefully maintained that it had become the air the Hawthorns breathed. It was their diplomacy, their discipline, their religion. Silence was the means by which they avoided confronting truths that would otherwise unravel the delicate order they claimed as virtue. Inside those walls lived Elalina Hawthorne, 18 years old and already considered a disgrace. She was a contradiction wrapped in lace and expectation, a young woman with the fine-boned beauty of a southern belle and the inner fire of a scholar, who had been given just enough education to become dangerous. Her skin was pale as milk, her hair the shade of dark mahogany polished by the sun, and her eyes the color of tea left to cool in cut crystal. But it was her spirit sharp, observing, stubborn, that refused to conform to the fragile mold carved out for women like her. Where other girls sat in parlors, practicing polite laughter and arranging flowers, Elalina prowled the dusty library, reading forbidden texts and writing questions no one wanted to answer. She outraged her mother, confused potential suitors, and irritated her father so thoroughly that he had begun to regard her existence as an intentional inconvenience. And of all the irritations she caused him, the greatest was her unwavering devotion to her childhood companion, Isabel. Isabel had grown alongside her, shared her secrets, matched her wit, and seen through every crack in the Hawthorne facade. The bond between them had deepened in ways neither fully admitted, though everyone silently suspected. In a world where even a whisper could scorch reputations, their closeness too tender, too intense became a slow-burning scandal. And then came Mr. Thomas, the ambitious cousin from a nearby estate, who arrived with a smug smile and an offer of courtship polished like a silver coin. The match was ideal on paper, but Elalina had never lived on paper. She had dismantled him in public, stripping his character down with logic sharper than any blade. He left humiliated, and her father left the gathering with the stiff walk of a man preparing for war. By the time they returned home, whispers had become pronouncements. A single word followed Elalina like a vulture, unnatural. The word stuck with a viciousness that others used to distance themselves from her. Invitations were quietly withdrawn. Former friends pretended not to see her. Business partners of her father suddenly found reasons to renegotiate. Alistair Hawthorne, a man carved from granite resentment, retreated into his study with cigars and brandy as though drowning himself in smoke could erase his daughter's disobedience. But instead, after days of brooding, he birthed a decision so venomous that even Savannah's heat felt cold in comparison. He summoned Silas the overseer, a gaunt man with a face carved from hardship and cruelty. Silas understood the dark turns of Alistair's mind better than anyone. When the command came, it needed no further explanation. The girl, Alistair said, not even using her name, is to leave the main house. She has forfeited the privileges of kinship. She will be removed, immediately. Silas said nothing. He never did. His silence was the perfect match for Alistair's malice. She requires correction. Alistair went on, as though he were discussing the sharpening of a tool and not the fate of his own daughter. She will be sent to the Westfield cabin, the one near the old pecan grove. Silas stiffened slightly. Everyone knew who lived there. Abel. A man. Whispered about in the quarters, with all the fear and awe. usually reserved for myths. He was enormous, towering, broad-shouldered, with the build of a man forged by labor that should have broken him long ago. His silence was legendary, his endurance impossible, his presence unsettling even to those who believed themselves fearless. Now Alistair leaned forward in his chair, and the glow of the oil lamp carved shadows across his aging face, making him look demonic in his fury. "Give him the girl," he said. Silas blinked, just once. It was the only sign that he understood how monstrous the instruction truly was. "She is to be under his authority," Alistair continued. "In every sense. He will break whatever spirit she clings to. She will live with him, alone, isolated, dependent, and, when the world learns of this arrangement, if it must, will know it was her own behavior that forced my hand." Silas accepted the order and left the study. Behind him, Alistair drank until the bottle was empty. The next morning, Elalanina was approached by her mother, a woman whose beauty had long ago curdled into bitterness and whose gaze now avoided her daughter's face as though contact might bring contamination. "You are being reassigned to the West property," she said in a voice devoid of emotion. "Your father has arranged your new conditions. No explanation, no gentleness, no regret, just exile." Elalena packed in silence, her mind already calculating the extent of her father's cruelty. She expected physical labor, harsh conditions, a locked room perhaps. She did not expect what awaited. Silas led her through the humid twilight to the edge of the property. The path grew wild, the trees denser, the air colder, when the cabin came into view, small, isolated, leaning slightly, as though exhausted by its own existence. She felt a spike of dread, sharp enough to stop her breathing, and then she saw him. Abel stood outside the cabin with his back to them, framed by the slanted light filtering through the pecan trees. He was still as a carving, his silhouette massive against the fading sky. When he turned, Elanina's breath caught. His face was worn, strong, unreadable. His eyes were dark and deep, neither warm nor cruel, but ancient in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. He looked like a man who had seen more suffering than any human should, yet carried it in silence. Silas shoved Elalina forward. "Your place is here now," he said. "Abel will ensure your conduct." Then he left. Abel said nothing. He only watched. For the first time in her life, Elalina felt the full fragility of her existence. Her father had not exiled her. He had condemned her. This was not punishment. It was a psychological execution, crafted with careful, elegant cruelty. Abel stepped forward, not quickly, not with threat, but with the slow inevitability of fate approaching. Elalina forced herself to stand tall and meet his gaze. There was no lust, no hatred, only an emptiness so profound that she felt her own fear reflected in it. Swallowed by it, the nightmare had begun, and it was a nightmare crafted not of violence, but of the unknown. The first night passed with the slow, dreadful motion of a dream one cannot wake from. Savannah's humidity seeped through the cracks of the small pine cabin, clinging to the walls, clinging to her breath. Every shadow inside seemed alive, stretching and curling with the flickering oil lamp, tracing strange silhouettes that made the room feel smaller, tighter, almost suffocating. Elalina sat on the rough wooden floor opposite the single cot where Abel lay. He had not spoken a word since Silas abandoned them there. Not a greeting, not a threat, not even a warning. Silence clung to him like a second skin. It was not the same silence that ruled the Hawthorne manor, cold, polished, and pretentious. Abel's silence was something deeper, older, something that seemed carved from the earth itself. He rested on his cot with the calmness of a man, accustomed to sleeping under storm or lash. His breaths were deep, steady, but something about their rhythm troubled her. At moments he drew air sharply, as though something inside him resisted the simple act of breathing. When the light caught his chest, she noticed how he occasionally pressed a hand to his ribs. A gesture so quick she almost doubted she saw it. She watched him because she had nothing else to do. There were no distractions in this place. No books, no conversations, no faint piano sounds from the parlor below. Only the sound of his breathing, the occasional chirp of a cicada, and the croak of a distant bullfrog from the marsh. Hours slipped by like molasses. Elena tried to sleep, but every creak of the wooden walls jolted her awake. Every shift of Abel's immense body made her pulse race. And yet, beneath her dread, she felt something else, a strange curiosity, a sense that Abel's silence held more than mere obedience to her father. Near midnight, a harsh, guttural cough tore through the stillness. It startled her so violently that she almost cried out. Abel's body jerked with the force of it, and he curled slightly in on himself. The sound was raw to be simple illness. It was the sound of pain endured too long. Elena rose from the floor before she even realized she had moved. She took a step toward him, then froze when he shifted. Even in pain, his movements were controlled, deliberate. As dawn approached, a faint gray light seeped into the cracks between the boards. When Abel finally stood, he did so slowly, as though pushing against invisible weight. He walked out without looking at her, disappearing into the trees. He did not lock the door. He did not gesture for her to follow. He simply left. Elena sat in the silence he left behind, unsure of what to make of it. The door not being locked was not mercy. It was indifference, or perhaps trust that the wilderness itself would keep her contained. She could run, but she would have nowhere to go. The plantation was vast, the surrounding woods treacherous, and the marsh unforgiving. But she would not sit idle. She stood and surveyed her new prison. The cabin was little more than a single-room cot table, stool, and a hearth that had not seen proper cleaning in months. She found a bucket outside and walked to the river, the muddy bank soft beneath her boots. She filled it, brought it back, and began scrubbing the floorboards, not because she wanted to prove anything to Abel, but because filth felt like surrender. Any order was a rebellion her father could not predict. The labor steadied her shaking nerves. By the time Abel returned, the sun was high enough to cast shimmering heat across the clearing. He carried a small sack of cornmeal in one hand and a bucket with 3 fish in the other. Sweat slicked his dark skin, catching the sunlight and giving him an almost bronze sheen, despite his size. His steps were nearly soundless. He paused in the doorway when he saw her work. He looked at the clean floor, then at her, holding her gaze for a heartbeat longer than before. Something flickered behind his eyes, not emotion exactly, but recognition, not of her identity, but of her existence. She was no longer an object delivered to him in silence. She was someone who altered the space. Without a word, he set down his catch and crouched near the hearth. He began cleaning the fish with careful, practiced movements. The knife in his hand flashed occasionally, glinting in the dim light. His hands were large, powerful. Yet he handled the fragile fish with a delicacy that contradicted everything about him. Then the cough seized him again. This time, it bent him forward, his massive shoulders trembling under the strain. When he straightened, Elena saw the subtle stains spreading on his shirt, dark and unmistakable. It wasn't illness, it was blood. Something inside her hardened not with fear, but with purpose. She crossed the room before she could talk herself out of it. "You are injured," she said quietly. Abel didn't look at her. "You have a deep cough, and your side is wounded. You need poultice, clean cloth, water boiled enough to scrub infection. Let me help." For a moment, she thought he would ignore her. But instead, he set the knife down slowly, turning toward her just enough to reach inside his shirt. He withdrew a small, crude bandage wrapped around his ribs. The cloth was stained red-brown, the edges darkening, a whip mark, fresh, deep. Silas. The truth chilled her more than the isolation. He did this to you, she whispered, and still, you work. Abel lifted his hand and made a short, sharp gesture mimicking the quick crack of a whip. The gesture was more eloquent than any words could have been. It said, "This is nothing new. This is expected. This is survival." Her stomach twisted. She could not reconcile the brutality of his wound with the stoic silence he wore like armor. "You will die of this if it's not cleaned," she said, her voice trembling though she fought to steady it. "I won't let that happen." His eyes narrowed, considering her. For the first time, she felt his thoughts pressing behind that quiet gaze. Not suspicion, not anger, but calculation. She was trying to save him something no one in his world would ever do. After a long moment, he nodded, the smallest motion, but it changed everything. Elalanina moved immediately, gathering scraps of her clothing, boiling water, scrubbing the wound with careful, trembling hands. Abel endured it, with the same stoic silence he gave the lash, though she felt the tension in him, saw how tightly he clenched the edge of the table when she pressed fresh cloth to his ribs. His breath hitched, but he did not pull away. In that moment, a fragile truce took root between them, born not of trust, but necessity, a shared defiance of the cruelty that had put them there. Later, when she stepped outside to breathe the humid twilight air, she found Abel kneeling in the dirt, carving strange symbols into the ground with a shard of slate, spirals, lines, shapes that felt older than the plantation, older than the country, older perhaps than either of them. When he sensed her watching, he lifted his face. Their eyes met. Then he erased the symbols with his hand and rose to his full height. A secret, destroyed before she could learn it. A warning, perhaps. The silence between them deepened, thick with unspoken truths. The darkness gathered. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured a storm building. A storm not just of weather, but of fate. The days that followed slipped into a rhythm that was both fragile and perilous. Elalanina grew accustomed to the muted sounds of the marsh, to the crackling of firewood beneath Abel's hands, and to the heavy quiet that seemed to settle over him like a second shadow. The isolation that had been meant to break her instead sharpened her senses. Every shift of wind carried a warning. Every rustle in the leaves suggested the world beyond the cabin watched them with indifferent eyes. Abel's wound took her constant attention. Each morning she boiled river water over the small fire, scraping away the brackish taste as best she could. She tore more strips from the hem of her petticoat. She cleaned his wound as carefully as if the slightest wrong motion might shatter something vital inside him. She expected resistance. She expected outbursts or a barrier of pride. Instead, Abel sat with the patience of a man who had long ago surrendered the luxury of resisting pain. Yet for all his quiet acceptance, Elalanina sensed something underneath an invisible current. A secret, a wariness not directed at her, but at the world beyond the clearing. It was most visible in the way he scanned the tree line every evening before settling for the night, or the way he stiffened whenever distant voices drifted on the wind. One afternoon, she stepped quietly back into the cabin and found him kneeling again near the hearth. His back was to her, his shoulders curved forward in a posture that did not suit his enormous frame. He was carving lines into the earth again with that small piece of slate, but this time the symbol was unlike the others. It was nearly a map, a circle denoting the main house, the crooked path that led to the river, the marshlands surrounding everything like a dark moat. Before she could interpret it, he sensed her presence. In a single sweeping motion, he erased the drawing, dust rising from the floor like breath. Elalanina stopped. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the dim cabin. She felt it again, that subtle pressure of his thoughts behind his eyes. Not hostile, not frightened, simply guarded. "Why do you hide what you draw?" she asked softly. Abel did not answer, but his gaze flicked not to the window, not to the door, but downward, where the symbols had been. She understood. He hid them because they were dangerous, and danger here did not belong to her alone. That night, rain gathered in the air. The wind carried the metallic scent of approaching lightning. Elalina busied herself with small tasks, mending her dress, sorting herbs, cleaning what little space she had. Abel sat at the table, sharpening his tools with slow, methodical strokes. When the storm finally broke, it cracked the sky in half. Thunder rolled so loudly through the cabin walls, she felt it in her bones. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists demanding entry. Abel stood abruptly. Lightning flooded the room, painting his enormous silhouette in white fire. Then, another sound, soft, muffled, but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Not the steady rhythm of plantation workers, not the lazy gait of visitors. This was pursuit. Abel extinguished the lamp instantly, plunging the room into deep darkness. Elalina's heart pounded as he moved, swift and silent, to her side. His hand found her shoulder, then gripped her upper arm not painfully, but with urgent strength. He pressed her into the shadowed corner by the hearth, his massive body positioning itself in front of her like a barrier against the world. For the first time, she felt the full weight of his presence, not as a threat, but as a shield. Quiet, he whispered. His voice was rough, deep, startling in its sudden emergence. She had heard him speak only once before. That single word command now vibrated through her ribs. Outside, the hoofbeats stopped. A lantern flickered beyond the window, a wavering glow slicing through the falling rain. Voices followed. One was sharp, impatient, dripping with authority. The other was subdued, the tone of an enslaved man forced to accompany his master. "This is the cabin," the harsher voice said. "Tracks point this way." Elalina stiffened. They were here for her, or for Abel, or both. But then the man spoke again, and his words tightened her throat. "Hawthorne said that runaway girl might come here. If Abel's been hiding her, he's finished." Runaway girl. Her pulse faltered. Isabel, she understood now, with terrible clarity. Isabel had not been sent away. She had run. And if she had run, someone must have helped her. She looked up at Abel. His jaw was tight, his breath controlled. He didn't meet her gaze. He didn't need to. The world rearranged itself in her mind. Isabel had run. Abel had helped her. Her father had lied. The deputy's boots squelched in the mud outside the door. "Search it," he ordered. The door creaked open. The deputy stepped inside, lantern raised high. Elalina felt Abel's breath near her ear, controlled, measured. She willed herself not to tremble. Her entire body felt suspended between life and death, dependent on silence so perfect it became a physical ache in her throat. The deputy moved deeper inside. His lantern beam brushed the table, the cot, the hearth. Once it hovered dangerously near the small wooden carving Abel had made of her dot. Abel shifted just enough to nudge the table leg with his foot. The figurine fell softly into shadow, hidden by the dark. After several tense moments, the deputy spat. "They're not here." "Then where?" The second man whispered. "In the marsh. Call the dogs. We'll run M down before morning." Boots retreated. The door slammed shut. Hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did Abel move. His hand slowly left Elalina's arm for a long minute. Neither of them spoke. The storm outside softened to a dull roar, its violence now a fading heartbeat. Finally, Elalina whispered, "Isabel. She ran, and you helped her." Abel didn't lift his head, but he nodded. A single nod, heavy with truth, heavy with risk, heavy with sacrifice. "She's alive?" Elalina asked. Hope and fear braided tightly in her chest. Abel reached into his small pouch and withdrew something he held with surprising gentleness. A handkerchief, fine lace edges, an embroidered initial in the corner. I.LL. N.A. Felt her breath stop altogether. He held it out to her. An offering, a confession, a plea for silence all at once. Isabel tightened. You knew her, she whispered. You protected her. Abel closed the handkerchief in her trembling hands, his own fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. Then he pointed toward the marsh, toward where Isabel had gone, and toward the danger that was coming for all of them. The storm's rage burned itself out slowly, like a living creature dying in the dark. By the time its fury dissipated, the marshland lay drowned beneath a trembling layer of silver mist. Every surface dripped with rain. The trees sagged beneath the weight of water, and the world felt eerily new-cleansed, yet somehow more dangerous. Inside the cabin, the air clung cold and damp. Abel moved swiftly now, with an urgency Ila had never seen in him. He doused the hearth completely, scattered the ashes, and smoothed out any trace of footprints on the cabin floor. His huge hands moved with a quiet precision that suggested practice. This was not the first time he had erased evidence of flight. Elilana understood, without being told. We must leave, she whispered. Abel gave a single nod. He pointed to the small, rough sack of food they had: cornmeal, dried fish, a cracked tin cup. He added what little he owned into another pouch: the slate, the carving tool, a few herbs, a short length of rope. He paused only once, touching his ribs with the slightest wince as the movement pulled at his wound. But he did not slow. Elilana gathered her makeshift bandages, wrapping them tightly so they would travel safely. She forced herself to take deep, even breaths, though panic buzzed under her skin like trapped insects. Do you know where Isabel went? She asked. Abel did not answer with words. He walked to the door, scanned the clearing, and then pointed into the densest part of the grove, the direction no sane person would venture in the middle of the night. The river, she murmured, remembering the faint path she had noticed earlier. The landing. Abel's eyes flickered with acknowledgement. The old landing. Something in his posture tightened. This was not simply a place. It was a destination he feared, and yet he walked toward it without hesitation. As they left the cabin behind, Elilana glanced back only once. The little structure stood quiet and dark, half swallowed by the trees, already looking abandoned. It would not remember any of the truths shared within its walls. The marsh greeted them with a suffocating embrace. Mud clung to their boots, sucking at each step. Vines trailed from branches like wet fingers. The humidity pressed against their chests, making every breath tangible. Fireflies blinked like lost stars in the darkness, and scattered frog calls bounced against the water. Abel led the way, guiding her through narrow deer paths, around stagnant pools of water, and between towering cypress trees that loomed like ancient sentinels. His steps were heavy, but silent. His footsteps found patches of solid earth almost instinctively. Elilana followed closely, her hand occasionally brushing the rough bark, or his arm, when the terrain grew treacherous. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell of river mud became, a metallic temps that mingled with decaying leaves. But soon, Abel's breath began to falter. At first, it was subtle, a longer exhale, a heavier step. Then he stumbled, catching himself on a bent cypress root. Elilana rushed to his side without thinking. You need to rest, she whispered, touching his arm. She felt heat radiating through his skin, fever rising fast. Abel shook his head. He pointed north again, his movements growing more rigid. The river was close. The danger behind them was closer. We can't outrun dogs if you collapse, she said, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. Abel's jaw clenched. He leaned once more against the tree, breath shaking, but his eyes remained blazing with determination. He was not afraid for himself. He was afraid of what would happen if they failed. Finally, after she pressed her hand to his ribs and felt the sickening heat beneath the soaked bandage, he gave a small nod, permission to stop. They found refuge on a tiny rise in the marsh, barely large enough for them both to rest. Elalana worked quickly, ripping open the old bandage, cleaning the wound with rainwater collected in a hollow of her palm. The flesh was red, angry, and swollen. Infection clung to the air like rot. Abel's breath came in shallow bursts. His massive frame trembled, yet he did not make a sound. "Silas did this to you," she murmured, "and still my father sent you out here, knowing you were injured." Abel opened his eyes. There was something new in his gaze, something that felt like grief. Wrapped in fury, he reached for his slate. His hand trembled violently, but he etched a crude shape into the surface, a heavy chain, then a line across it broken. He pointed first to himself, then to the drawing of the chain, then to Elalina. She inhaled sharply. "You stayed because of me," she whispered. Abel nodded once. The weight of that truth sank into her chest like a stone. He had been given orders to break her, to dominate her spirit. Yet instead he had chosen to protect her, to defy Alistair Hawthorne's cruelty, even at the cost of his own life. "Why?" she breathed. Abel hesitated. Then he drew one more symbol, the crude outline of a house, the Hawthorne mansion. He circled it once. Then he dragged the slate edge downward in a long, violent stroke. Splitting the drawing in half, Elalina felt the world tilt. "You planned to destroy him." Abel didn't nod. He didn't have to. It was written in every scar on his body. She closed her eyes, her breath shaking. Her father hadn't sent her to the cabin to punish her disobedience. He had sent her there to remove her from the main house, to isolate her completely, to keep her from seeing what he was doing. Whatever he was planning was bigger than her disgrace, bigger even than Isabel's disappearance. She forced herself back into the present. "We must reach Isabel," she whispered. "She knows something, and my father wants her silenced." Abel closed his hand around her wrist. His grip was steady, warm despite the fever. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time she saw something that looked like urgency, fear even. He pointed toward the river. It was time to move. They pushed forward again, slower this time. Abel's breaths were labored. Elalina supported him when the mud pulled too hard at his feet. She no longer feared him, not in the way her father had hoped. She feared instead what would become of them if Abel fell. They reached the final stretch of marshland, just as a faint glow began to appear through the trees. Voices shouting, the splash of oars hitting water. Abel stopped abruptly, motioning for Elalina to crouch. He guided her behind a massive oak, draped with Spanish moss. Together they slipped into its shadow, pressing against the cold, wet bark, through the veil of mist and foliage. They finally saw it, the old river landing, and standing upon it, illuminated by lanterns and frantic motion. Alistair. Hawthorne. Elalina felt the last remnants of her childhood shatter. Her father's white suit was splattered with mud. His hair hung disheveled around his face. His eyes were wild, fevered with desperation. He barked orders at two rough-looking sailors who were shoving heavy crates onto a small sloop tied to the dock. Crates stamped with a familiar symbol, H. Inside one. When a sailor slammed the lid shut, Elalina glimpsed something that froze her blood. Silver, not plates or cups. Treasures. Ornate, old-world treasures. European artifacts that had mysteriously vanished from the Hawthorne estate. Weeks ago, an incident Alistair had blamed on a petty thief. But now, Elalina saw the truth. Her father was smuggling stolen goods out of the country. He wasn't trying to punish her for being unnatural. He was hiding a crime. And then she saw her. Isabel. Pale, exhausted, hands bound, dragged from a small shack at the dock. Her father grabbed her arm, roughly. "Get her on the boat," he hissed, "before the deputy figures out the truth." Elalina's breath trembled. The truth was not about her rebellion. The truth was about Isabel. She wasn't a runaway. She was a witness. And Alistair Hawthorne intended to dispose of her. Elalina stepped forward. The instinct to save her overriding all fear. But Abel's hand caught her arm, firm and steady. His eyes burned. Not yet, not until the right moment. Voices rose. The river churned. The night thickened around them. The truth had finally revealed itself, and it was far darker than anything Elilina had ever imagined. Elilina's breath froze in her chest as she watched the scene unfold on the riverbank. Lanterns swung wildly in the sailors' hands, throwing ragged circles of light across the dock. The river's surface churned with the turning tide, pulling at the sloop as though eager to carry it away. Rainwater still dripped from the branches above, making soft, persistent pattering sounds that mingled with raised voices. Her father paced at the edge of the dock, gesturing sharply as two men struggled to load the last crates. The cold, gleaming silver she had glimpsed still burned in her sight. Priceless items, her family's ancestral treasures stacked carelessly in crates, like smuggled contraband. Her father's voice cut through the mist. "She saw me bring the crates," he snapped. Pointing an accusing finger at the exhausted woman, the sailors dragged forward. "She saw too much. Get her aboard." Isabel stumbled as they pulled her. Her hair clung in wet tendrils to her cheeks, and her wrists were bound so tightly that even from the shadows, Elilina could see the dark bruises forming. Isabel's eyes were dull with fatigue, but when she lifted her head, the lantern light caught something in her: fear, desperation, and something else. A glimmer of hope as she scanned the shadows for a familiar face. Elilina's heart lurched. Painfully, Abel gripped her arm tighter, forbidding her silent instinct to run to Isabel. His hand was hot with fever, trembling ever so slightly, yet impossibly steady in its resolve. His breath grew shallower, as though each inhale cost him something he did not have to spare. But he did not loosen his hold. "Wait," he seemed to say without sound. Her father barked orders again, his voice a cruel whip. "Hurry up. I want the ship gone before the deputy circles back. Take the girl and the crates. When the tide turns, sail until morning. By then, the story will be ready." "What story, sir?" one sailor asked nervously. "The one that clears me, you idiot," Alistair hissed. "A runaway slave girl steals the Hawthorne silver and flees with accomplices. She dies at sea. A tragic but convenient end." The sailor swallowed hard. Understanding, Elilina felt the cold of the river seep into her bones. Isabel was no longer merely a lost friend, she was a marked sacrifice in Alistair Hawthorne's scheme, just another piece he intended to move or destroy as needed. Abel leaned forward slightly, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs, to get a clearer view. His jaw tightened as he watched the scene. No one could mistake the meaning in his expression. He had not simply helped Isabel escape. He had known all along what Alistair planned. He had tried to save her, and now she was about to be taken. He could feel the tension roiling in Abel, like a storm contained in human form. Fever drenched him in sweat, but his eyes, dark, sharp, and alive, were fixed on Alistair with a focus she had never seen before. This was not fear. This was something ancient, feral, and resolute. The moment of stillness was broken by the sound of metal striking wood. A sailor lifted a crate too roughly. Something inside clattered silver, scraping against silver. Alistair spun, fury twisting his features. "Careful, you fool. Do you know what that's worth? More than a servant's life." The other sailor muttered under his breath. Alistair whipped around, his eyes narrowing dangerously. But before he could respond, a faint Rasula breath of movement escaped from Elilina's hiding place. Her boots sank into wet leaves. The sound, small as it was, sliced through the air. Alistair snapped his head in their direction. "Who's there?" Elilina froze. Abel's grip tightened, warning her not to move. Every instinct inside her screamed to run, to grab Isabel, to expose her father then and there. But her body refused to move under Abel's steady hold. His hand trembled not from fear, but fever, but his grip did not waver. Her father squinted into the darkness. "Come out," he ordered. But the shadows remained still. The sailors stopped moving. Even the river seemed to hush. Alistair stepped forward, raising a lantern high above his head. Its light sliced through the mist like a blade. But Abel was already pressing Ilalanina lower, guiding her behind a thick root, his huge form positioned between her and her father's line of sight. His breath was ragged now, almost wheezing. Each movement cost him pain he refused to acknowledge. Alistair stood for a long moment, scanning the trees. Probably raccoons. One sailor muttered, "Raccoons don't breathe like that." The other answered darkly. Alistair stared a moment longer, suspicion furrowing his brow. But the mist thickened, muddying his view, and without warning, he turned back. "Get her aboard now," he commanded. Isabel struggled weakly, her voice cracking with a desperation that cut through Elanina's heart like a blade. "Please, please don't shut her up," Alistair snapped. That was enough. Elalina surged upward without thinking rage, bright and sharp in her chest. But Abel caught her again. This time he held her not by the arm, but by both shoulders, pinning her gently but firmly to the earth. His forehead nearly touched hers. His eyes burning with fever, and determination held a message. "If you move now, he kills you both." She froze, breath trembling. Only then did Abel release her. His gaze drifted toward the dock again. Beneath his calm exterior, something stirred, a whisper of violence, not chaotic, but focused, sharpened into something that felt like destiny. A crack of wood echoed across the dock. The sailors were lifting Isabel, her weak cry, "Eleanor," carried faintly across the water. Elanina's breath shattered. But what she did not notice, immediately because her eyes were locked on Isabel, was the transformation overtaking Abel. He inhaled deeply, painfully, and then steadied his breath, as though anchoring himself to something far older than fear. He rose to his feet, not swiftly, but deliberately. Every muscle in his towering body tensed, his fever-slick skin gleaming under the moonlight. Elanina reached for him. "Abel, your wound you can't." He turned his head just enough for her to see his eyes. They were no longer merely determined. They were resolute, uncompromising, a silent oath forged in suffering and iron. For the first time, she understood the full weight of who he was, not a brute, not a broken man, not a tool her father could use. Abel was a force her father had never intended to wake. He stepped from the shadows. The moment he moved, gravity shifted around him. Lantern light caught his form as he emerged, massive and wordless, from the mist. He walked not like a man, but like judgment itself called forth from the marsh. The sailors saw him first. "What the—" But their words dissolved into panic, because behind Abel's silence was a storm more powerful than the one that had raged earlier that night. Justice, retribution, and the fury of a soul long denied its freedom.